Welcome to the Deep Dive. Have you ever felt like your English is pretty good, but sometimes conversations just feel, well, awkward?
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
you've missed a cue, said something slightly wrong maybe, even though the grammar was perfect. Today, we're diving into those tricky, often unspoken cultural nuances in English communication that go way beyond vocabulary and sentence structure.
Yeah.
We're going to explore why these rules can feel like hidden minefields sometimes.
That's a great way to put it. Minefields. It's fascinating how much of our communication relies on shared cultural understanding, isn't it?
Definitely.
You can know all the words, but if you don't quite grasp the underlying social norms, those expectations, then, misunderstandings are almost inevitable. These cultural minefields, as you called them, can really make even confident English speakers feel a bit uncertain.
Exactly. And that's our aim today. We've looked at some really interesting material that shines a light on these common cultural, let's call them stumbling blocks.
Sure.
Our mission is to unpack these potential minefields and hopefully equip you with some practical insights so you can navigate English conversations with, well, more confidence and maybe avoid those unintentionally awkward moments.
And to illustrate, think about this. Someone sneezes, right? And a well-meaning person immediately launches into some very direct medical advice.
Oh.
Now, the intention is undoubtedly kind, we assume, but in some English-speaking contexts, particularly maybe with people you don't know that well,
Yeah.
that level of directness, this unsolicited advice, it might feel a bit too forward, maybe even intrusive.
I see that.
It's a small example, sure, but it highlights how cultural expectations around, say, expressing concern or offering help can really differ.
Okay, let's delve deeper into one of the core areas where these differences really show up. Directness versus indirectness.
Yes. A big one.
Personally, I come from a background where being direct is, well, it's valued. It's seen as efficient, honest. But I've noticed that in many English-speaking cultures, especially maybe British English from what I've observed, there's a much greater emphasis on a more indirect way of communicating. Why is that?
Well, that preference for indirectness often stems from, a cultural emphasis on saving face for both the speaker and the listener.
Saving face, okay.
A direct no, or maybe a blunt criticism, it can be perceived as damaging to someone's self-esteem or their social standing, maybe.
Right.
Whereas indirect language allows for a more graceful negotiation of ideas, a softer delivery of potentially negative information. Take a simple request. A direct command like send me that report now might be acceptable in very specific, perhaps hierarchical settings.
Maybe military or something.
Perhaps, but in many English-speaking workplaces, it could easily come across as rude, demanding even.
Right. So if I were to just walk up to a colleague and say, I need that file, that might not go down too well. It's almost like there's a hidden code we need to crack here.
It kind of is, and it raises an important question about how we frame our needs while also, respecting the other person's autonomy, their workload. So instead of a direct demand, a more indirect approach often involves softening the request. You might hear phrases like, could you possibly send me that report when you get a moment?
Okay, possibly.
Or, I was wondering if you might be able to help me with this. See the use of qualifiers. Possibly. Wondering. They create a more tentative, less imposing tone.
And I've heard some wonderfully roundabout requests like, would you mind terribly if I asked for that file? That one feels very specifically British, doesn't it?
It does. It's a perfect example of what's sometimes playfully called the fluffy clouds of politeness.
Lightly fluffy clouds.
Yeah, it playfully describes these layers of extra language used to soften a request, almost like padding it with gentle words to make it less demanding.
Okay.
The language almost sort of downplays the imposition of the request. And this indirectness isn't just for requests, it extends to giving criticism as well.
Ah, right. Criticism.
A direct negative statement like, that's a bad idea, can be quite poorly received in many contexts.
Okay, so if I have a different opinion, I can't just say I disagree. What are some gentler ways to express that? I can definitely see how that directness could cause friction.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, maintaining harmonious relationships, avoiding direct confrontation,
Right.
you can see why softening disagreement is important. So instead of a direct rebuttal, you might hear something like, that's an interesting perspective as we consider.
Ah, okay. Acknowledging first.
Exactly. It acknowledges their viewpoint while subtly introducing an alternative. Or I see your point, but I wonder if another approach might be more effective for X reason. Again, less confrontational, offers a rationale.
Except,
Even something simple like, perhaps we could explore some other options as well. It keeps the conversation open, more collaborative.
so it really boiled down to how you say something, sometimes even more than what you say. It's about carefully choosing your words to get your message across while being mindful of the other person's feelings, avoiding that unintentional offense.
Absolutely. And this awareness, this difference between direct and indirect styles, it's truly crucial for navigating professional and social interactions effectively. It's finding that balance, really, between clarity and politeness.
All right, let's explore another fascinating and, yeah, often hilarious cultural minefield, humor.
Oh, humor. Always tricky.
I consider myself to have a decent sense of humor in my own language, a bit of wordplay, some sarcasm perhaps. But when I try those in English, sometimes it just, it falls flat. Why is it so tricky?
Well, what's fascinating here is how deeply ingrained humor is in culture.
Yeah.
What one group finds amusing can be completely baffling or even, offensive to another. Puns, for example. They rely on the specific sounds and multiple meanings of words in a particular language.
Right.
They're notorious for not translating well at all. And sarcasm, with its reliance on subtle cues, tone of voice, facial expressions, shared context. Oh, that can be particularly challenging for non-native speakers, both to interpret and to use effectively.
Tell me about it.
Yeah.
I remember once trying to tell a joke. It was a real hit back home. Involved a talking animal and some bureaucratic mishap
Okay.
to a group of English speakers.
Yeah.
The silence that followed was, well, deafening. Someone actually asked if I was feeling okay.
Oh, dear.
It really highlighted how humor doesn't always cross borders.
Oh, that perfectly illustrates it, how humor can be so culturally specific. Even self-deprecation, which is common in some English-speaking cultures, right, as a way to build rapport, appear relatable.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Even that can be misinterpreted if the audience doesn't understand the context or the speaker's intent. They might genuinely think you're insecure or maybe fishing for reassurance.
So how do we navigate this comedic landscape without constantly putting our foot in our mouths? Should we just, avoid jokes altogether when speaking English?
Not necessarily. Humor can be a wonderful way to connect with people, build relationships. The key is to be mindful, strategic even.
Okay.
One of the most helpful things you can do is just observe. See what native English speakers around you find funny. Pay attention to the types of jokes they tell, the topics they find amusing, and, importantly, how they deliver them.
Observe.
And starting with safer bets is also a good strategy. Observational humor about shared experiences like the weather or a funny incident at work everyone saw, common daily frustrations. That's often a good starting point.
Because it relies less on specific linguistic tricks.
Exactly. It relies less on those specific linguistic nuances or deep cultural knowledge.
So instead of my elaborate talking goat tax evasion story,
Well, maybe park that one for a bit.
maybe I should have started with something like, man, this rain, huh? A bit less risky.
Precisely. That's a universally understood, relatively safe topic for lighthearted conversation. Then, as your understanding of the cultural nuances grows and you get more comfortable with your audience, you can gradually test the waters. Try some more complex humor.
Right.
Also, really consider the context. Humor with close friends is obviously different from humor in a professional setting or when you're meeting new people.
Sure.
And pay close attention to your delivery, your tone of voice, facial expressions, body language. They provide crucial cues that you're being humorous, especially with something tricky like sarcasm.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Observe, start simple, consider the audience and situation, and watch the delivery. It sounds like building comedic awareness is a gradual process.
It is, precisely. It's about developing your comedic awareness over time and just being attuned to the reactions you're getting from your audience.
Okay, let's move on to something that always feels a bit delicate. Compliments and how we respond to them. When someone compliments me on something, my immediate reaction is sometimes to sort of downplay it, almost dismiss it, like, oh, this old thing. Is that likely to be misunderstood?
Well, that instinct to deflect or downplay compliments, it's common in many cultures, isn't it, as a sign of humility?
Yeah.
However, in many English-speaking cultures, particularly in North America, and I think increasingly elsewhere too, the expected response is often a more direct acceptance.
Really?
Yeah. Strongly denying a compliment can actually make the giver feel a little awkward, as if you're rejecting their positive observation or maybe implying they have poor taste.
Oh, wow. So if someone says, I love your new bag, they shouldn't say, oh, it was really cheap. I almost didn't buy it. That was my go-to response.
Well, while your intention might be to appear humble or relatable, it could be misinterpreted. It might sound like you disagree with their compliment, or maybe that you're fishing for more praise. Conversely, you also want to avoid over-the-top, really effusive praise when giving compliments. That can sometimes come across as insincere.
It feels like there's a very narrow sweet spot here. What are the general guidelines for navigating this gracefully, both giving and receiving?
Okay, for giving a compliment, sincerity and specificity are key. So instead of just a general, nice shirt, maybe try, that color really suits you.
More specific.
Right. Or, you did a fantastic job on that presentation. The way you handled X was particularly effective.
Yeah.
Specific.
Got it. And receiving.
When you're on the receiving end, honestly, a simple thank you, or that's so kind of you to say, is usually perfect.
Just now.
Often, yes. You can add a little more if you feel comfortable and feels natural, like thanks, I just got it, or thank you, I worked hard on it. But the most important thing is to acknowledge and accept the compliment gracefully, without excessive self-deprecation.
So just a straightforward thank you is usually sufficient. I can definitely work on that. Feels much simpler than trying to come up with a self-deprecating remark every time.
Absolutely. It's about accepting the positive feedback without too much humility getting in the way or downplaying the giver's sentiment.
We're covering so much ground. Let's briefly touch upon something else that can lead to awkwardness, especially when you're getting to know people. Personal space and boundaries in small talk.
Oh, yeah. Boundaries. Important.
Are there any topics that are generally considered, let's say, off limits when you're just starting a conversation with someone you don't know well in many Western English-speaking contexts?
Yes, definitely. There are certain topics generally seen as too personal for casual chat with new acquaintances in many Western English-speaking cultures.
Like what?
Well, things like someone's salary or the cost of their possessions. You generally wouldn't ask, how much do you earn? Or comment, wow, that watch must have cost a fortune.
Right, okay. Money talk is out.
Usually, yes. Age, especially asking a woman her age, is also widely considered impolite. Similarly, avoid making detailed or critical comments about someone's weight or personal appearance. Beyond a general positive remark like, you look nice today, is usually best.
And I imagine politics and religion can be risky territory too, especially in those initial interactions.
Precisely. Unless you know the person well and you're confident it's a topic you can discuss respectfully without strong disagreement erupting.
Yeah.
It's usually best to steer clear. They can be quite sensitive, divisive subjects.
Definitely.
And finally, direct and personal questions about marital status or plans for children. Things like, why aren't you married yet?
Yeah.
Or when are you planning to have kids? Those are generally considered very intrusive in casual conversation with new acquaintances.
Got it. So bringing up my strong opinions on, I don't know, fiscal policy during the initial coffee break with a new colleague is probably not the best way to break the ice.
Smiling.
Right?
Probably best to stick to more neutral territory, universally relatable topics like, the weather, weekend plans, hobbies, or something you have in common like the event you're both attending or your shared work environment. Much safer ground.
This has all been incredibly helpful, but it feels like, wow, a lot to keep in mind when you're just trying to communicate effectively.
It can feel like that, yeah.
What's the single most important piece of advice you could give someone who's trying to navigate all these cultural nuances in English communication?
Okay, the most valuable guideline I can offer is this. When in doubt, observe.
Observe.
Yes. Pay close attention to how fluent English speakers around you interact. Notice how they make requests, what kind of humor they use and respond to, how they react to and give compliments, what they discuss in casual conversation, especially with people they don't know well. Mimicking these behaviors within reason, of course, and within your own comfort level can be an incredibly effective learning tool. It's like becoming a sort of anthropologist in real time.
So it's like being a cultural detective, constantly gathering clues about what's considered appropriate and effective communication.
Exactly. And don't hesitate to ask a trusted friend or colleague for clarification if you're genuinely unsure about something. A discreet, hey, in this kind of situation, is it generally okay to say X, can prevent a lot of potential awkwardness. Most people are understanding and, honestly, happy to help clarify cultural norms if you ask respectfully.
Observe, learn from what you see and hear, and don't be afraid to ask for clarification. That's really practical advice.
It really is about developing your cultural awareness over time through active observation and just a willingness to learn.
Well, this has been a truly insightful deep dive into the often unspoken rules of English communication. The big takeaway for me is that true fluency involves so much more than just mastering grammar and vocabulary. It's really about understanding these underlying cultural nuances. And importantly, it's absolutely okay to make mistakes along the way. That's a natural, probably essential part of the learning process.
Absolutely. Cultural learning is a continuous journey, right? And the very fact that you're consciously thinking about these things, asking these questions, puts you on the right path. Empathy and a genuine willingness to learn and understand different perspectives are incredibly valuable assets. And it's worth remembering, even native English speakers sometimes make cultural missteps. When they're in unfamiliar environments or interacting with people from different backgrounds, we all do it.
That's a very comforting thought. To our listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insights and perhaps even a few moments of, aha, so that's why that felt weird. We've all been there.
For sure.
If you have your own funny, anonymous cultural mix-up story you'd be willing to share, please do drop it in the comments section of our platform. We genuinely love to hear them, and perhaps we can all learn and have a laugh together.
That would be great. And thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure discussing these fascinating, sometimes tricky aspects of communication.
The pleasure was all ours. A huge thank you to our expert for sharing such valuable insights today. And thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep learning, and don't worry too much about occasionally feeling too weird. Developing awareness is the very first and maybe the most important step.